Hey everyone, and welcome to my video about HTTP requests and responses. Um, so, what are requests? Requests are things that are data that are sent to an endpoint, to a URL. So, this type of this request can be a get, a post, a put, or delete. Now, there's other verbs that you can also use, but the four above are the most popular. So let's kind of go into what each one kind of is. Now, I went into it a little bit as well in my controllers video, but we'll go into it here as well. So what a get request is something like a select from a database, and a post would be an insert into a database or an insert into your application. A put is equivalent to an update, and a delete is just that, a delete. So keep in mind that you should be thinking and thoughtful about what request you use for what. So if you're creating an application where you want to return like a bunch of orders, for instance, you want to have the user use a get request for that. So you'll use an HTTP get verb in your application, and then you'll return a list of orders for that. Now, if you want the user to send you an order that they want to insert into your database, you'll want to use an HTTP post request for that. And same with a put and a delete. If you want the user to be able to update an order in your database, then you would use a put. If you want them to be able to delete, you would use a delete request. If you want them to delete something, don't use a get request for that. You could, but don't do it because that's not really standard. And responses are returned back from an endpoint. So let's say that you send a response or a request to an API, to an endpoint. That endpoint will return you a response. So responses return a status code, such as 200 or 404 or 500. So a 200 status code is like okay, 404 is not found, and a 500 is something like internal server error. So you get the response status code back, as well as you can get an object returned back to you. And you can serialize this object using a JSON format. And then convert it to JSON string for other applications to consume. So this means that if you want a user or your application, the front end, to submit data to your endpoint, to your API, you would serialize that data into a JSON format, and then you would send that to your endpoint. And then your endpoint, if you wanted to send back data to the application from the backend, you would then you can convert that to a JSON string and send it back to your front end as a response, and then have your front end then convert that back to an object. And think of requests something like a person A asks, "How are you doing today?" Then the response for person B would be, "I'm fine, thanks." So also think of this like person A says, "Can I get 5 strawberries?" Person B would respond, "Okay, here you go." That would be kind of like a get request. Or person A says, "Here is my money, take it." Person B says, "Okay, great, thanks for your money." That would be a post. And then like person A says, "Actually, let's change the amount of money that I just gave you. I want to give you $5 instead of the 10 that I gave you." And then person B would be like, "Okay," and that would be like a put. And then delete is just delete something from the database. I don't really have an example for that. And there's really 3 ways to send data through a request to an endpoint. One way is through the query string parameter, which I'll show you guys here in a second. I actually think I showed it in the controllers video. It's a query string parameter. The body, you can send data through the body of the request, or you could send data through the headers. So here, in order for you to receive a HTTP request of like put and post, and I think delete, maybe it's just put and delete. Anyway, you have to have this code within your web config application. And yeah, so you have to have this code within your web config, and specifically right underneath the configuration tag in your web config. Postman. So Postman allows you to interact with APIs by sending requests and receiving responses. It's good for testing your endpoints quickly, so you don't have to, you can just spin up your endpoint or your application, and you don't have to go through all the UI of actually, logging in, doing this, doing that. No, with Postman, you can send requests quickly and get back the responses without having to go through much stuff. A good link that I found is this right here, and it teaches you a lot about how to utilize Postman to send requests and receive responses. And here's a website that I found that is really useful for converting your C# objects into JSON objects, and it just makes it easier and faster to create your requests to fill out your objects if you don't, and you don't have to type much. And the reason that you'll want to use something like this, or just write out, the JSON object yourself, is because in order to send a request over to your controller, you'll need to convert that first into a JSON. You'll need to serialize that into a JSON object, and then you'll send that to your controller, to your endpoint. Your endpoint will receive that JSON object, will convert it to a C# object for you automatically, and then you'll be able to use it within your application. And then in your response, you'll again want to serialize it to a JSON object and send it back to your front end. So here's Postman. So here's a GET request. And just so you know, when you go to www.google.com or any other website, what you're doing is you're making a GET request to that site. So here you can see me making a GET request to Google. I click send, and then this is what I get back from Google. And this right here, if you kept scrolling down, this is actually, it's a website. It's a Google website, the homepage. So just so you know, when you visit a website using your browser, you're making a GET request. So here's me starting up my application. Notice the web URL, so localhost and then port 44303. And we'll use this information in Postman for making requests. Now ignore contact us. So here you can see the localhost and then the port. And then if you were watching my previous video about controllers, you'll see that I have API and then orders. And then I'm wanting to get order 1. I want information about order 1. So I put 1 here. And I'm using the GET request. And here you can see a bunch of my saved requests here. So with Postman, you can actually save your requests and just keep reusing them. It's really easy. So here, what this URL is saying is I want to hit up this controller orders. This is the route, API orders for that controller. And I have this method route that accepts an ID of 1, or accepts an ID, and then I can specify whatever. So I specified 1, and then I click send. And what this did is it returned to me, it went to my application. So Postman is its own separate application. What this did when I click send is it went into my application and it said, hey, me, Postman, I want to hit this URL. So give me whatever the method returns for this URL. And so it returned to me an order. and you can see it returned to me ID 1 and returned to me all the information about it, including the services. So if I were to have expanded this, you would see all the services along with who ordered it. And you can see that the status that it returned was okay. So let's continue. Here you can see that I'm making a GET request on orders, but I'm not specifying a method like routing attribute here. I'm just saying API orders. And then, so what this will do is it'll, if you guys remember from my last video of controllers, this will actually get me all the orders. So here's like an array. So this right here is an array, the square bracket, and then the brackets here are multiple orders. So here's order 1, order 2, order 3, and then etc., etc. And then here I have order ID 13, and then all of its information. That's what that does. So again, remember, get is for retrieving information, for selecting information. Here's an example of post. So here I am posting an order. So I'm creating an order. So what's cool about Postman is that you can actually, create random variables like this to generate random numbers and stuff like that, random dates. So here I'm generating a random name. And so here my model in my application accepts. So this kind of mimics, well, not kind of, it does mimic my model. But you'll notice I'm not specifying an ID because the ID gets generated by the backend. The front end, this, does not specify the ID. The application specifies the ID when it creates it in the database. But anyway, so this, you can see that my order model is right here. This is pretty much exactly the same as my order model in the backend. So it has a customer name property that I'm specifying here. It has a service date property that I'm specifying here. How much the user has paid, specified here, and then the order by ID, who the user ID of the person creating this order. And I just put 1. And then the service IDs associated that are going to be associated to this order. And then I click send, and then here you can see that it created me a new order, created me an order with an ID 18. The random name here ended up being Chris Kling. And then, the service dates that I put here, and then the services. If I expanded this, you would see 1, 2, and 3, and then all this information. Now, one other thing that's important to note is that this is the body. And then back here, let's go to back. This is the query string parameter. Now, you can also put query strings in here, but this is a query string parameter. This doesn't have any query strings, and this doesn't have any bodies, this request. And this request, you can see that it only has the body. And then this is the URL. And you can see I'm specifying add order here with a post request. And then here, in order to add the body on here, I selected raw. First of all, I clicked body. I clicked raw, and then I selected JSON format. Here, I'm using the put verb, and you can see that I'm calling this URL. I selected raw, again, JSON format within the body. And you can see that I'm saying here, with order ID 1, change order ID 1 to all of this stuff. So whatever order ID was before, it's now updating it to be this. Because in my application and in the controller, in the method for this route, I'm doing the business logic to replace, to get order ID 1 and from the database and replace its data with whatever data is specified by the user here. So then here, you can see that I'm returning back information about the order now. After the user updates it, I'm returning the updated order. And then delete. So here I'm specifying the query string parameter of 17. This is the ID. This is the routing attribute. There is no body because I don't need a body for this. But what you'll notice here is a header. So you'll notice that I have a header. I create, and in my previous video, again, I said that headers are like dictionaries. It has a key and it has a value. So you'll see here that I have a key called secret, which I look for in my C# application in the controller. I'm specifically looking for a header with a key of secret. And then I'm checking to see what its value is. If its value is not, this is my secret, then I don't allow the user to delete an order. Now, if the user specified this is my secret, like I am here, and you click send, then what happens is, in my instance, I return an OK, and I go ahead and I delete the order, and I send the order back to the user that they just deleted. So this is the order that my application returned back that was deleted. And all these requests that you are seeing over here, like this request, so this is a request and this is a response. When you click send, it sends the request to the controller. Then the controller processes that request within its methods using the routes to select the method. And then it sends you back a response. And this is the response. And you can save the response right here if you want. And then within the response, you can get headers and cookies, but the body is really what we're interested in. But anyway, so all these requests, all of this can be extracted using Postman and converted into code. So let's say that you wanted to put this in your application, you could easily generate that code in Postman. So what you would do in Postman to generate, let's say this, you would click right here. This is the code icon. And then here you can expand, this would pop up, and then you can expand this right here and select whatever you want. So if you were to just export this and send this to a colleague of yours or whatever, you would typically export this as a curl, and then you would just copy and paste everything that's in there and you would send it to them, and then they would have the same request that you do. But for your applications, you can export it as any one of these things. So in our case, we're going to export it as JavaScript as jQuery because we're going to be making an AJAX request to our application, to our backend from our front end. So you could utilize jQuery, fetch. And then if you wanted to make a request within your web application, you would use this. Now, REST Sharp is similar to HTTP client, so you would, but they're not the same. So you would have to use, decide if you want to use REST Sharp or HTTP client, and then just convert your code to that. But that's how, using this is how you would make an HTTP request in your backend to another endpoint or API. But for front end, we would select this. And then this is the code that it would generate. So all you would need to do is just select all this, copy it, and paste it into your front end. And then obviously, change some stuff like the service IDs, like all this is going to be, random to whatever your user has inputted. So the customer name, you're going to want to add a variable here, service state, variable, if they paid, and then the services that they that they want. And then you're going to tie this into a button click. And then when that happens, it's going to execute this AJAX request, and it's going to send it to your application just as how Postman did, and you will receive a response. And then the response is captured here. So right now this is just console logging the response, but you could always do stuff with a response once you receive it. So that's it, guys. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to get notified whenever new content comes out. All right, guys. Thanks. Have a good day. Bye.